I've come to Buckingham Palace, the official London residence of King Charles III, but I'm here to meet the court of another king. I'm here to come face to face with the movers and shakers of the court of Henry VIII. On the side of Buckingham Palace lies a very special gallery that houses exhibitions from the Royal Collection. And right now, it's home to an extraordinary group of Tudor portraits from the 1520s and 30s. It raises the question, why are we so captivated by the Tudors? Why are they such an endless source of fascination? It was a tumultuous time of enormous and important change. But I think much of it is because we can look them in the eye. We have the opportunity to weigh them up, to consider how they presented themselves, to see them as real people, full of life. And much of this comes down to the genius of one extraordinarily talented man, a Swiss-German artist who plied his trade across Europe, but made his name at the Tudor court. Hans Holbein the Younger. Hans Holbein the Younger began his artistic career in continental Europe in the early 16th century. But in 1526, a new opportunity presented itself. The internationally renowned scholar Desiderius Erasmus gave him an introduction to a potential English patron, a man of wealth and influence, Sir Thomas More. I'm meeting More and the rest of his family with Royal Collection curator Dr. Kate Hurd. They are just incredible because we see just a few lines and yet sort of seems to capture the man.
He really does. Holbein is really, really good at illusion. He's always been fantastic at this, and this sense of a flat piece of paper and him bringing the figure out of it is just amazing. This is a preparatory study for a finished painting, so he's looking to capture the face, and he's done that with a really sharp line to show him where the edge of the face should be. He's caught the eyes beautifully with different coloured chalks and the mouth. He's just caught it on a sheet of paper.
And are they from the life? Is the sitter behind the piece of paper?
Yes, they're right there in front of Holbein, and that's what he's capturing is what is in front of him. So in each of them, he's looking at the sitter, he's posing them, and he's drawing what he sees.
The individual drawings of More and his family were all created as studies for a large group portrait that Holbein was planning, depicting Thomas More proudly wearing his Lord Chancellor's collar, sitting amongst his extended family. Talk me through how Holbein created something like this. As you say, how did he use his skill to show the glint of an eye or the curve of a cheekbone?
Absolutely. Should we look at Anne behind?
Anne Cressica was Thomas More's ward, aged just around 16 years old when Holbein drew this sketch.
This is the most wonderful drawing, and it tells us a lot about the way that Holbein works. He's working entirely in coloured chalks, which is a technique he seems to have really adopted after his visit to France in 1524. But he's used those chalks so brilliantly that he's caught all the sort of textures and her appearance.
Talk me through his technique when it comes to doing what you've called, the glint of the eye, the curve of the cheekbone. How does he do it?
He will have started with a black chalk outline, just setting out the sort of model on the sheet of paper. And then from those outlines, he builds up layers of chalk to create the textures and the colours. So you can see he's used further black chalk on the sleeve, and he's coloured that densely to show that that's velvet. He's caught the patterns of I think it's probably a watered silk, so he's just caught the texture of it. Her hair is brown, but he's built that up in a number of different coloured layers. He normally starts light, works to dark, so you can see just by her parting there's more black chalk. He will have diluted red chalk, wet it to create that pink of her face, and then when that's dried, he's used a dry red chalk just to catch the corner of her eye, to catch her lips there. So these drawings, although we have no documents for Holbein, these drawings tell us so much about the way he worked.
And it seems amazing to me that this is not the finished product. This incredible piece of art is just an indication to himself for a later project.
It's Holbein's record that he needs, it's his study, so it's a working tool.
It feels when we're looking at these that they're so realistic. They feel like photographs. It feels like we can see the person captured in a second, and therefore it feels like we don't just see the exterior, we see their interior. How much, Kate, do you think we can read character into these?
I think it's so difficult. I think one thing to remember is that Holbein edits his sitters. So the drawing, he often changes details as he creates the finished painting. And we don't know if he did that because he was trying to make the likenesses more accurate or if he was trying to make them more flattering. So what you see is not necessarily what Holbein saw in front of him. At the same time, he's so wonderful at capturing a figure. It's hard not to see character in the faces. People like Richard Southwell, who's displayed in the next gallery, it's the most awful man. And you see this arrogance caught in his face just by the way he holds himself. But I think it's dangerous to read too much into them beyond the fact Holbein has caught a whole figure on the sheet of paper.
Next to the portrait of Anne is the young man she was betrothed to, John, Thomas More's only son. I was struck by the fact that here with John Moore, he's reading whilst it's going on, which again suggests he's sitting for a while, he needs to fill up the time.
Absolutely, he's reading in the finished work, but at the same time, you get a sense that he's just reading while the world goes on around him. The painter's drawing him, he's going to sit and he's going to finish his book.
Holbein aimed for accuracy in his preparatory drawings, capturing a moment in an individual's life. Like More's youngest married daughter, Cecily Heron. Am I right in guessing that she might be pregnant? Doesn't it look like she's got sort of slightly loose lacing?
Yes, this is Tudor maternity wear. So Holbein, in capturing what he sees in front of us, is recording something that's otherwise largely unrecorded. This is what a Tudor maternity dress looks like.
One thing that's famous about Thomas More and his daughters is that he educated them. Yes. Do you have any sense of them as women who are choosing how to present themselves here, or of that education?
So in terms of pose, that's probably chosen by the artist. He's thinking of a group composition and how the figures interact with each other. But the fact that Thomas More commissions a group portrait, that he commissions all his family to be part of that, shows you that he treats his daughters as equal with his son. It's a really interesting idea that this portrait shows them all at home, all interacting, reading, discussing.
It's really striking who is looking at Holbein and who is not. So Thomas More's father appears to be looking at the painter, but Cecily Heron is looking off.
You have to see each of these as very carefully posed for that group portrait, and they all interact within the group portrait. And John Moore, who's the most senior, is the one who is the focal point of the composition. So in some ways, he's the one who looks forward. So although these are individual studies, Holbein very clearly had in his mind what he wanted to achieve in the group portrait. John Moore's very interesting because if you look at his eyes, Holbein has drawn them very faintly. There's a real sense of an old man's eyes there. He's really caught the aging, the slightly pale, slightly wet eyes. And he's diluted chalk again, the red chalk, to create that pink of the flesh. But then when that's dried, he's used dry red chalk to create this sense of broken veins in John Moore's cheeks. And he's slightly caught the stubble with just slight bits of black chalk around the chin there. It's the most incredible study of an old man.
I mean, it seems extraordinary to me that he can create the impression of that sort of translucent skin one gets as one ages in this picture just with chalk.
It is incredible. I mean, Holbein is incredible as an artist. He's almost unrivaled in his ability to do this, to create with a flat sheet of paper, just coloured chalks, to create this figure who appears as if he's standing in front of us.
And I suppose also it's Holbein in this first important commission trying to show off. So that he gets further work.
Yes, he's turned up looking for work in England. He's been sent to Thomas More with a letter saying, you know, look after this artist, see what you can do. This is his calling card. This is his chance to prove himself. And there's a letter from Thomas More back to Erasmus that says, your artist is a wonderful artist.
The More family portrait was the perfect start to Holbein's career in England. Tragically, the finished group portrait was lost in a fire. All that exists today is a later copy. But the exhibition does have a great example of how Holbein transformed his preparatory sketches into completed paintings.
Here we have Henry Guildford, who was a senior courtier at Henry VIII's court. And we have this wonderful sketch. And if we were to criticise it at all, how dare we criticise Holbein, but we have perhaps what one might call a slightly flat left eye here. But what's interesting about it is that we don't just have the sketch in the Royal Collection, we also have the finished picture. And so you can see Holbein's process. And what I find so interesting about it is to see what is the same and what is different. That left eye has been worked up. And the hair, yet, is exactly the same, the little tiny strands that come forwards but go further down. We can see that he hasn't shaved for some time. And in the final painting, we'll see more of the dimple in his chin. And so perhaps there's a sense we've got the sitter and the artist conferring, and what we have created in the end is what Guildford wants. This is the look that he wants to portray. Interestingly, it's that he's a great supporter of Catherine of Aragon because he has pomegranates on his clothing.
The drawing shows Guildford without any badges of office, but they were boldly added to the finished painted portrait.
He's wearing this chain, which is the chain of the Knights of the Garter, and he had become a Knight of the Garter the year before. This picture is painted in 1527. And this move from sketch to painting is important because it shows us that Holbein is a jobbing artist. He's had the commission from Moore, and now he's got someone even more senior at the court, Guildford, and he has to do a good job. He's not doing this for our benefit, he's doing it to make his own living. He's doing it so that he can earn more work. What's wonderful about this exhibition is that we have here the faces of Henry VIII's courtiers, men and women, people we can identify by name, and others whose identity is lost. And yet I have a sense when I look at this wonderful selection of faces that I'm transported in time, that like Holbein, I am just a few steps away from these people, that I am in the Tudor court itself.
Holbein didn't name the sitters in his drawings. He didn't need to. He soon moved on to the full worked-up painting. But the drawings were gathered together later, and inscriptions were added by Edward VI's tutor, Sir John Cheek. Over 100 years later, they were copied onto the pictures themselves. It has caused much debate, particularly when it comes to one of the most controversial figures of Henry VIII's court, his second wife, Anne Boleyn.
Kate, this is perhaps the most exciting picture here, as far as I'm concerned, because there is no agreed surviving portrait of Anne Boleyn from her lifetime, is there?
No, absolutely not.
And yet, this seems to be quite a clear candidate because it says Anne Boleyn Queen, but historians and art historians have traditionally, well, hitherto, in fact, up until now, said it's not her. Why have they said that?
It's a very debated portrait. Some people have said yes it is, some people have said no it isn't. The inscription is challenged because it's in an 18th century hand. So that was written in the early 18th century when the drawings which were in a book were taken out of a book to put on the wall of Queen Caroline's closet. But they were written on the drawings at that point because they were copying inscriptions which were on the album pages of that book. And those inscriptions were by a man called Sir John Cheek. Now, there has been lots of challenge to Cheek's inscriptions. Sometimes we know he got the identifications wrong for people he wouldn't have known, but he would have known what Anne Boleyn looked like. So this seems a really good start to identifying the portrait as Anne Boleyn.
Okay, so let's assume that the inscription is correct. What other arguments have been made against it being Anne?
One of the key arguments is the fact that Anne Boleyn is recorded to be brunette by a number of witnesses, and the hair on this appears very light. So this has been a strong reason for suggesting this isn't Anne Boleyn. If you look closely, her eyes are brown, which is a really good start because she's got brown eyes. We looked at this really closely in preparation for the exhibition, and if you look at that hair, you can see that it's rubbed. Now, this drawing is like all the others, chalk on paper. Chalk sits on top of the paper so you can rub it off quite easily. And it seems that the drawing has been rubbed over its surface. Now, Holbein built up particularly hair in layers of different colours. He starts with light and he adds darker and darker colours to build up the texture and the depth and the tone. What I think you're seeing here is a lot of the dark layering on top has disappeared. If you look right at the top of her head there, at her forehead, you can see that there are many more colours of chalk in there, and there are many more colours of chalk here. And I think that just the tone, a little bit more red and black in there, and she'd have appeared brunette. So I think the tone of the drawing has changed over time, which means that we can explain away the brunette argument.
And the other thing that's said is that she's just wearing the wrong clothes, that a queen who was aware of fashion would not have appeared in such an informal gown for a portrait. What do you make of that argument?
I agree, it's perplexing. She's not dressed in her finery. The other question is what the purpose of the portrait is. It's an informal image, and if this is a drawing for a miniature rather than a full portrait, it makes a lot more sense. We've got an informal, personal image for Henry VIII. You know, besotted Henry, when he's very much in love with Anne, might have wanted a miniature of her dressed very informally. I don't think the dress is a problem in identifying it as Anne Boleyn.
If this is Anne, then perhaps this is Anne in an intimate moment. I'm really struck by the fact that her eyes are looking down, just as we saw with some of the pictures of More's family. And there's a sense that maybe she's reading, or maybe she's in a quiet moment. This is Holbein having access to all areas, catching her in a moment where she's not put on her best dress for a special portrait, but she's just being seen as she is in her chambers.
She's contemplative. I think you're right that she's reading or looking down. We know she read a great deal. She will have commissioned this portrait, or someone will have commissioned this sitting, so Holbein has been asked to create this. But I think, yes, you're catching her unguarded, as it were.
The other thing that's often said about this picture is that she's just not good looking enough. I mean, it's astonishing, but it is said regularly that this is just not the sort of beautiful image that we've come to expect of Anne Boleyn.
I think that it's a very attractive image in that she is contemplative. You're seeing her right there. I think that who are we to judge what people find beautiful, or judge people for their appearance?
I agree wholeheartedly. And the fact is, I mean, people often point out that she's got a double chin. It looks to me as if she's wearing something to hold that coif, that headdress in place. And who's to say a double chin is unattractive in the Tudor period?
I think that there's something holding those flaps down. There is something definitely running under her chin, yes. So, and also she's looking down at this point. She's being caught in a very particular pose.
And what we know about her from documentary evidence is that she has a long face, which we see here. But there is something else that has counted against it, and that is what is on the back. Yes. Talk me through that. Do you think it's a red herring?
I don't think it's a red herring. I think it's the final piece of evidence. On the back of the drawing is the coat of arms of a male member of the Wyatt family. And that has sometimes been used to suggest that the sitter is a member of the Wyatt family. But this is the only drawing by Holbein in the Royal Collection, which holds the majority of the portrait drawings, that has anything on the back. And I think that probably indicates that this was scrap paper at some point. And so you can imagine in 1536, Anne Boleyn is executed, and nobody's going to want any more portraits of Anne Boleyn, but paper is expensive. It's kept in the studio, and a few months later, Henry Wyatt, who's one of Holbein's first patrons in England, dies. And we don't have any record of Holbein being involved in his funeral, but you can imagine something ephemeral, a decoration for the funeral bier, a decoration for the chantry chapel. Holbein turns the piece of paper he doesn't need anymore over, sketches for his own memory the coat of arms of Henry Wyatt on the back.
That's made me catch my breath. This idea that the portrait of her is just as disposable as she has been for Henry VIII is astonishing.
It is, it's quite something. And also, you see again Holbein working. We see him thinking, I need a sheet of paper. I don't need this one. I'll turn it over. So again, we get back to seeing the artist in his studio, seeing his sense of creation.
Well, it's thrilling to imagine that we could just lower this and she would be the other side.
Isn't that amazing?
It's just extraordinary to stand in front of a piece of paper that was once used to record the face of Anne Boleyn. Holbein was working at a time when queens and courtiers rose and fell, a time of shifting loyalties, allegiances forged and broken. The genius artist capturing the people he was paid to paint, standing at the heart of this whirl of history and humanity. The exhibition includes several drawings he made of the people connected with the downfall of Anne Boleyn in 1536, including one of the most dazzling courtiers of the time.
If I could meet just one person from Henry VIII's court, I think the person I would most like to meet is Sir Thomas Wyatt. He was a poet and a diplomat, and perhaps the most brilliant person at the court. And he also understood the dangers of court life. He talked about the slipper top of court estate. He wrote in one poem, "I cannot frame my tongue to feign, to cloak the truth for praise without desert." He cannot praise those people who don't deserve it. And this is him. I mean, look at him. He's so very handsome. But he also has what his biographer, Susan Brigden, has called the sort of quintessential Wyatt. He looks sort of quizzical, his eyebrows slightly raised, he's looking off. And there's something here about his role as an ambassador. An ambassador, of course, has to lie for their country. But there's a sense of restlessness. And Wyatt himself said when he was on embassy to Spain, "I restless rest in Spain." There's that sense of, I don't know, kinetic energy about it, that here we have a man who is uncomfortable in the court. At least that's how I read it. We know in 1536 that Wyatt was accused with Anne Boleyn of adultery. He was put in the Tower and amazingly escaped with his life, and then went in exile to his home in Kent, and then the following year was sent to Spain. So this must have been from the early 1530s, when Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom he may have had a forbidden love, was in her ascendancy. Perhaps that explains some of his difficulty in catching our eye.
The execution of Anne Boleyn also meant that Henry VIII had a new queen, and Holbein had a new portrait to draw.
Anne's successor as Henry's queen is, of course, Jane Seymour, and this is her. So in colouring, Jane is the antithesis of Anne. We've got her very pale eyes here. And this fits with the evidence that we have from the Imperial Ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, who says that she is so white in colour that one would consider her rather pale. And there's been lots of sort of negative comment on her looks, as always happens with women. But it's true that Holbein doesn't flatter. You can see her cleft chin. She's wearing what's a very fashionable style, which is her gable hood is pinned up. But we can't see her hair, and that sort of means that we don't get a sense of what we would expect a woman to look like.
Jane Seymour's portrait does reveal a few clues, not just about her appearance, but possibly her beliefs and sympathies as well.
So here we've got a faint outline of a gold piece which has a diamond and a ruby and a pearl hanging from it. And just here, the faintest of outlines of a jewel that has the first three letters of the name of Jesus in Greek, which is either exactly the same as, or a jewel very similar to, a jewel worn by Catherine of Aragon in her portraits. And that's fascinating because it tells us that even if Jane didn't commission this, she was making choices about how to present herself. We know of Jane's activity as queen that she supported Princess Mary, Catherine's daughter, and she supported those Catholic institutions, the monasteries. And so there's a sense that in this, by the stones that she is choosing to wear, Jane is telling us about her allegiance. So we don't necessarily have to read character into these women's faces in order to know something about what they were thinking.
The women in this exhibition are extraordinarily vivid, both the famous and the less celebrated.
I love this one. This is Frances de Vere, Countess of Surrey. This was probably drawn around 1535-36. She had married Surrey back in 1532 when she was 14 years old, which means that she's about 17 here. And she's got such an arresting gaze, and it's completely deliberate because Holbein has painted in those individual eyelashes, and he's put a touch of white in her eyes just to make them pop. And he's also put notes to himself. I love this. So he's put here rosa velvet or pink velvet to indicate to himself the colour of her gown, same colour as her lips. And we've also got the lovely yellow in her headdress, matched by a note saying yellow for her girdle. So she would have been in this, lovely bright colours. What I love about this is that this is a woman who will go on to have 7 children, who will be widowed before she's 30 years old. She's not someone you're going to read about much in the Tudor history books, but she lived, and we have a sense of her great vitality from Holbein's picture here. He forces us to remember the women because he makes them just as arresting, just as real, just as alive as the men.
Francis de Vere, Thomas Wyatt, Anne Boleyn. Tudors famous and forgotten, but all given compelling, enduring life by the chalks, inks and paints of Hans Holbein.
Paintings in the Tudor period tend to be like photographs released from Buckingham Palace of the royals today, carefully staged and vetted. But when it comes to Holbein's sketches, it feels as if we have something else, that we have almost a moment caught off guard, a moment of rehearsal before the main event. It's the closest thing to candid snapshots of the Tudors that we'll ever get. And they may be unreliable as a guide to character, but they confront us with one undeniable truth. These people were alive, as actual as we are today. And when we look at those unseeing inked faces, it is as if time bends, as if we just need to lower the drawing and we would see the court of Henry VIII happening before our very eyes.
Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.